There's a chilling undertone to the Epstein file story, and it's captured powerfully by a piece that didn't get a lot of attention over the weekend by Michael Schmidt of the New York Times. And he reported about how hard it's been for him to get people to go on the record to simply criticize the Trump administration or a Trump administration policy or maybe a Supreme Court ruling. And the reporting reveals just how deeply Trump's retribution campaign is chilling dissent overall, even among those who should be speaking out. Schmidt writes and reports that lawyers, former officials, even seasoned national security voices, people who have direct insight into Trump's policies, have refused to go on the record critiquing him. And there's just one simple reason: fear. They fear retaliation. They feel loss of security clearances, threats to their careers, even personal risk. They fear personal costs, being targeted in Trump's ongoing purge of perceived opponents. Hence why he's going after Brennan and Comey. Okay, look, I'm not sitting here defending Comey, all right, and his tenure as FBI director. He made a ton of mistakes, but there's a difference between being a bad public servant and and committing crimes while being a public servant. He committed no crimes while being a public servant. But all these folks fear personal costs, being targeted in Trump's ongoing purge. One high-profile lawyer noted that they've been approached by colleagues who said, quote, just don't want to run afoul of this administration because they know how vindictive they are. This is what somebody told anonymously to Michael Schmidt. This isn't now in the abstract anymore. This is systematic weaponization of fear that the Trump administration has done. It colors every discussion now about immigration, every FEMA decision on flooding relief, every repackaged narrative about epidemic denial, by the way, right? The lack of coverage on the RFK Jr. inspired measles outbreak is just, talk about wanting to make my head explode. That one, it makes my head explode. When people who know better stay silent, what does that do to our public discourse? And what does it say about those who's really in control? So look, it's easy to frame this as just Trump politics, but it is much bigger. And immigration enforcement decisions aren't just policy, they're political theater. Anyone who might challenge the narrative about border chaos risks being targeted. On FEMA and climate, let a top scientist speak out and you risk career annihilation. As a result, officials stay quiet or say what they're told. And on Epstein, lawyers fear being dragged into a legal or political fracas if they comment, even on name after name issues that deserve public scrutiny. So I think this piece by Michael Schmidt is quite the warning. Go check it out. It's over the weekend in the Times, because when silence becomes the safest choice, truth loses its advocates and power becomes unchallenged. This is why so many of us are so comfortable not being a part of the tradition of media companies that are owned by corporations that don't seem to care about their news divisions anymore. Because we're in this situation where corporations care more about how they interact with this government, and they are not going to back up their news divisions. It's a huge, huge problem. The Federal Reserve Chair, Jay Powell, his term is up May of 2026. It is clear Donald Trump is obsessed with trying to get interest rates lowered sooner than that, because he knows his tariffs are about to create economic calamity. He's trying to minimize that economic calamity, hoping that lower interest rates somehow create a fog of economic news that sort of neutralize the investor concern about tariffs. Eventually, of course, though, all these tariffs are going to get paid by consumers, and the cost of living is going to go up, and that's going to be the issue that bites them. There's no amount of stock market sort of fog is going to cover up paying more at the dollar store, which becomes the $10 store, or paying more at Target, or paying more at Walmart. But it's clear Trump is looking for a pretext to fire Powell. And this was a story that's starting to take shape. The Trump administration is trying to create a new narrative, because while he can't fire him over policy, there is a loophole where the president could fire the Fed chair if he was somehow if he could fire the Fed chair if they were somehow misusing taxpayer money that had nothing to do with policy. So what is this about? It's about the idea of cost overruns on the Fed Reserve's remodeling of its Washington headquarters. Here's the headlines. There's a bipartisan investigation into a $2.5 billion renovation, about $700 million over budget, allegations of, quote, VIP elevators, rooftop gardens, marble finishes, even beehives. Well, the Fed Reserve Chair, Jay Powell's already testified that there were no VIP elevators, there were no water features, there were no rooftop terraces. He called those claims misleading and inaccurate. Now, the planning documents say otherwise. Of course, there are plenty of, architects and contractors will put anything into a plan, hoping it gets paid for, knowing that a third of it isn't going to be done. So this is one of those cases of how there's a kernel of truth in where this is going, but it doesn't mean there were actual cost overruns. Now, what's the White House up to? Well, the White House, led by the OMB director, Russell Boyd, has sent Powell a pointed 11-question letter with a week to reply, questioning compliance with federal building regulations. The budget director, Kevin Hassett, has openly said Trump could fire Powell for cause if wrongdoing is proven. But here's what makes this dangerous. The president seems to be seeding a storyline that somehow Powell lied to Congress. All right, trying to control and manufacturing a narrative. Do you see a theme here about reality versus narrative? So Trump's team released these details. Powell responded, but he has only a week to rebut. At that point, the administration may simply claim cause. And as the Wall Street Journal warns, it risks undermining the Fed's independence, and that could rattle global markets. So make no mistake, the White House is on a loophole hunt. The law doesn't allow firing a Fed chair over policy, but it does allow it for misconduct. Trump's turning a budgeting issue into a constitutional battlefield, one engineered with spin and timing. That means the story isn't about marble or beehives. It's about process, because in Trump world, if you control the release of facts and shape the narrative, you get to craft facts as you go. And once that happens, those inconvenient Thursday reveals can justify the unthinkable by a Friday. So yes, we've been covering reality versus narrative. We've covered fear, and now it's power's pretext, how the president can weaponize administrative details, right, to reshape institutions. And in this case, we're watching him build a script. So be wary of that. Finally, one more item from the weekend that I don't think you should miss. And if you did, you should go back and check it out. My friend Tom Edsall, call him my friend because I regularly contribute money to his poker game. I say contribute money because I never seem to win when I play poker with Tom Edsall. That is a word of warning to all of you. But more importantly, is a very compelling New York Times op-ed, his sort of regular op-ed, that is ringing alarm bells for Democrats. He highlights the growing crisis within the Democratic coalition, a crisis rooted not just in economics or immigration, but in gender itself. And in the piece, this is the part I found interesting. Edsall quotes Richard Reeves. He's the founding president of the American Institute for Boys and Men. And he explained the 2024 shift of men, particularly younger men, towards Trump and away from the Democrats. And he explained the shift this way. He says, quote, because the Democrats effectively ran as the women's party. And what Reeves' evidence was, he points to a March 2024 poll summary by the pollster Anna Greenberg, who wrote in The Hill, 60% of self-identified Democrats are women. The base are women of color, 92% of Black women, 65% of Latinas, and 69% of AAPI women voted for Joe Biden in 2020. In other words, Democrats have leaned so heavily into their female base, especially women of color, that many men feel ignored, and in some cases, some of them feel attacked. Reshma Sajani is a founder of Girls Who Code, and she put it bluntly after the election, quote, no one wants to be part of a movement that ignores or even denigrates them referring to men. And she argued that Democrats must address men's issues. Quote, we can't build the democracy we need without men, and right now we're shutting them down and pushing them away. And Jim Kessler, Third Way, another centrist Democratic group, echoed concerns with some pretty direct honesty. He said this to Edsall. The language we use is hoity and elitist. Men are considered privileged and advantaged. He warned that non-college educated men see Democrats as the party that criticized them, mixed with a sense that economic ignorance further deepens the divide. Look, what Democrats have gotten into is that they are coming across as a party who essentially said any success by a man was because they had a gender advantage. At least that's what men heard. I know that's not what many women were saying and what many Democrats were saying, but that is what's come across. And so whatever it is, it came across, and I'll never forget, I had a producer point this out to me back in 2016. Hillary Clinton was doing a rally, and she was name checking every single demographic group that she wanted to support. She wanted their support from, and except one. She never asked for the vote of men. And it was one of these weird things where my producer, who said, I don't really want to vote for Donald Trump, but I wish she would ask for my vote. And that's how a lot of men have felt. The Democrats don't seem to want to communicate with men, that instead there's more of a desire not to almost run against men. And I get it. Toxic masculinity, as espoused by Donald Trump, is just that, toxic, and not exactly the way any of us would want to see our sons behave or be raised. But there is, as with everything, everything's been about the extremes, and there's not been enough nuance, and that nuance, that lack of nuance, may be why men feel as if they are feeling pushed away by the Democratic Party, particularly non-college educated men. So the fact is, here's what Democrats have to do. If they don't re-enter men's lived experience, economically, culturally, socially, they are risk. They don't want to be boxed in by the Women's Party, a self-reinforcing reality that could cost them future election. Not about abandoning gender equity at all or diluting progressive values. It's about building a more inclusive message, one that says, we hear you, your struggles matter too, you aren't the enemy. We'll see, right? It's so funny. Just 10 years ago, Republicans were petrified of the gender gap. They felt like, oh, if they can't figure out how to win some women back, they couldn't win national elections anymore. You know, the gender gap can cut both ways. And right now, the gender gap is cutting more so against the Democrats than it is against the Republicans.